Hello there, kia ora. It has been a very strange and stressful week for a lot of people. As you know, Otago got hit by the worst flooding that it's seen in over 100 years. More rainfall fell in the last couple of days than has for the last 101 years. It's obviously a really high impact event. My thoughts go out to the people of Otago. So far, everybody seems to be relatively safe, but it doesn't mean it's not stressful or dangerous. So, thoughts definitely go out to the people down there. Doesn't mean our Prime Minister isn't doing something about it. I mean, he's clearly getting dressed up in a tuxedo and going to a Hall of Fame award instead of, trying to work out what he can do to help the South Island. Again. Anyway, check out this week's episodes of stuff that was done across content. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all of those things. Also, you can become a member so you get cool little fun emojis, I guess, when you come and chat in our live stream on Fridays. Oh, which reminds me, at the other end of this video, Blake's got a message for you as well about the live streams on Friday. He's got a bit of a poll going on and wants your feedback on some stuff. So, check out the videos, go have a listen to what Blake has to say, try and enjoy the show, or at least not pull your teeth out in anxiety, fear, and apprehension with everything that's going on. Yeah. Until next week, have a fantastic time, live long and prosper, enjoy the show. Hello there, kia ora. If daylight saving time didn't throw you and you managed to wake up in time, you might have caught David Seymour on Q&A on Sunday, where he called the voters the Great Unwashed, a derogatory term according to the Cambridge Dictionary that refers to poor and uneducated people, so I'm sure he didn't mean it in any contemptuous way. Anyway, Seymour's appearance came with the usual nanny state justifications for his pet projects that he tells people isn't nanny stating, and the last lot is bad isms that we get from this government all the time. And it laid out the basis for a tool set that we have that creates a bit of an impact around how people perceive the truth. It's called the Illusory truth effect. It's actually a term used for the impact of repeating lies enough that people start to believe them. While the source of a statement or a comment has a lot of impact on how much we trust information, screeds of research have shown that constant exposure to disinformation increases the amount of people who believe the bullshit. And Seymour did this on the show. One of these was actually a claim about fair pay agreements, where Seymour claimed the International Labour Organization gave the FPA a scathing negative opinion.
And I just also make the point that, when Labor put through the so-called fair pay agreements, they had a scathing negative opinion from the International Labour Organisation, and Labor said, oh, well, this is important to New Zealand, we carry on doing it.
Which never happened. In 2021, Business NZ went to the ILO and complained about them. The ILO said it was fine, but they should probably work more with community partners in legislation development, giving the FPAs a seal of approval. The Australian government member of the ILO said it was a system that would deliver better living standards, and they should know they've got them. The Belgian government said that it fully supported the virtues of collective bargaining, but also the way it would help develop businesses and the economy. Media agreed at the time the ILO supported it, and so did industry organisations that represented workers. Not so much the ones that represented quote-unquote business interests. But Seymour still got away with it on Q&A. Now, stating a lie and repeating it is common practice for politicians. You just need to see the fact checks that go into a political debate. In the 2023 election, every leaders' debate saw lies from every party in each debate. Even though National demonstrably told more, and technically the Young Leaders debate had that Shortland Street actor crying about woke extremism and putting the K back into iwi and stopping the World Economic Forum and the UN. What we have today, though, is, with this government, a unique perspective that creates a stronger impact of the illusory truth problem. Every coalition partner takes credit for decisions based on the same false data and promotes it across social media platforms. People who follow MPs across the coalition will often get multiple versions of the same disinformation in their justification of their actions. Now, this is probably because all three coalition partners want to take credit for their latest vice signalling activity in front of their dedicated voter base and look like the driving force for the policies. But it does have the added impact of creating a reinforced impact on voters whose confirmation bias makes them want to believe that disinformation. But in a country where we have a government building policy on disinformation that they're wanting to spread, it's beginning to look like their marketing strategy is to remember that a lie will run around the world while the truth is still getting its boots on. Sometimes our politicians are tying those shoelaces together to make sure that the truth is held back somewhat. Hello there, kia ora. It's October, which means we're coming up to the 1 year mark since the election, which isn't the same as the 1 year mark since the government came into power, since it took them so long to negotiate, well, just about everything ACT New Zealand First wanted into the coalition agreement. And it seems maybe things aren't going so well with the current government. Labour internal polling has just a 2-point difference between the left and right blocs. Luxon is still a historically unpopular Prime Minister, and with comments like, "We get it, I'm rich," he just can't seem to connect to the everyday person on the street who's struggling under his government's policies, while he sits back and counts his hundreds of thousands in untaxed capital gains he's made in the last month after 2 property sales. After the decision to gut the Dunedin Hospital to service the entire Lower South Island, which saw 35,000 people out in protest over the weekend, and that Otago mayors were told just 2 weeks ago the build was still going ahead as planned, after the decision to make the Tararua Highway a toll road, which has seen hundreds of locals out in force to public meetings where local national MPs were berated and just had to stand there and take it, where international organisations have been warning potential migrants looking to come here to work in necessary areas like the health sector to stay away because the government is seen as openly hostile to them. After OIA requests showed that the Te Reo Māori course that was recently gutted by $30 million to fund print resources for the rushed maths program, which is based on erroneous test results, was actually considered incredibly valuable and high quality, and wasn't NZQA accredited because it's a personal learning development course for educators and success isn't measured the same way that NZQA measures outcomes for students. Or that another OIA revealed that the much lauded success of bringing down crime in the Auckland CBD also saw that there was an additional 26 to 30,000 victims of violent crime around the country, and 85% of those were women. That family violence rose sharply, that older people were being targeted more, and most of that could be tracked back to the extra financial stress people were under. That regions are suffering as mills and forestry are hit by economic downwinds, that reversing the oil and gas exploration bans will screw up our international reputation, that Nicola Willis missed last quarter's deadline to announce their grand plan for replacement ferries, which has already cost an extra $500 million, that reports tobacco giant Philip Morris would be the big benefactor of tobacco tax cuts. This government still doesn't know where that advice came from, by the way, about that topic. That the most basic tools for keeping people safe from COVID, like free RATS tests, are now gone. That this quarter's action plan released from the PM yesterday included unpopular choices to remove agriculture from the emissions trading scheme, the removal of the long-standing genetic engineering ban, more beneficiary sanctions, and announcing the first government-funded for-profit charter schools. Is it any wonder why people are souring to this coalition? After all, the things I just mentioned are just from the last week. It's a cavalcade of bullshit gushing like Niagara Falls. So it must be time to wheel out the National Party's secret weapon. Ta-da! It's former Prime Minister John Key, doing another rare but suspiciously timed round of public appearances. A sit-down with Stuff to talk about his quirky superstitions, his totally normal collection of helicopters, and of course, how it doesn't matter that Donald Trump is a convicted felon who foments hate and can barely string a sentence together whose policies would harm our trading partnership with the US and the people who live there. He's offering tax cuts, so John Key would vote for him. After almost a year of this, it's understandable people don't feel like the country is back on track. But as long as John Key is in the news, the party faithful kind of feel that it still is. And more of everyone else feels like they're watching the Tanguai disaster unfold. Hello there, kia ora. It took just 5 days from "we can't afford the hospital we've been promising the South Island for years" to "maybe we should look at public-private partnerships to pay for it," in the most unsurprising announcement since your cat declared the food bowl was empty while it's still half full. PPP is a model that ACT has been pushing for a long time, believing it to be a more efficient way to undertake, well, in the case of the ACT Party, pretty much everything. But it is a model often floated for big infrastructure projects, with supporters often claiming it'll create more efficient cost-benefit outcomes and ultimately cost the government less as private enterprise pays for things then leases it back to the government. But there are a lot of issues around PPPs, like the fact that there's actually no real clear definition of them. Each model is slightly different and it varies from country to country. When it comes to our healthcare system, we already have a lot of what some would consider PPPs in ways that you might not necessarily realise. Surgery sent to private clinics or private specialists, for-profit telehealth, for-profit urgent care, for-profit services like radiology. But it's a very modern neoliberal idea to pitch PPP for infrastructure. Now, they'll claim it means you can bring in private enterprise efficiencies to the process, that private enterprise will bear the weight of the cost of upfront funding, meaning that taxpayers are charged less. Only the research doesn't actually back that up. At best, the research around value for money and private efficiency from PPPs is mixed and is influenced by a range of factors, like the changing costs of labour and materials, the ability to loan over longer periods at variable interest options, whether a government considers a PPP investment on book or off book, and the required rate of return and profitability from the private investor. The Attorney General of Canada has actually repeated many times that off-book accounting for government and PPPs is misleading, and the public need to be aware of the actual costs of projects. In fact, numerous studies have shown that as a cost-saving venture, PPPs tend to miss the mark. On average, governments end up paying more for PPP projects than they would for traditionally funded projects, because of the private sector's higher cost of capital, added transaction costs, and a profit-driven ideology for operations. And it's not uncommon in past projects around the world that the way to lower these costs has been to cut corners, designing the project to be more profitable. This has led to supporters of PPPs to use the phrase value for money as an argument for their use. But this is both vague and has been called technocratic mumbo-jumbo by auditors in the past, with value for money being seen as an inadequate way to evaluate costs. For many, it's seen on a spectrum of privatization. While it's not completely selling assets, it's far from being an asset owned by the country without a drive for profit that leads to cost-cutting measures throughout the process. Research in Australia found that partnerships were inferior to the standard model of public procurement based on competitive tendered construction. And a New Zealand Treasury report commissioned by the last national government found there was, and I quote, little reliable empirical evidence about the costs and benefits of PPPs. Their report also pointed out that there are other ways of obtaining private sector finance that don't involve, again I quote, the contractual complexities and rigidities of PPPs. There's also an argument that these partnerships reduce risk, but they really just transfer the risk. While UK reports into this issue also highlighted the large returns private investors have made off the back of taxpayers when this happens. Organisations like Serco, for example, have undertaken past PPPs in the UK which have seen massive cost blowouts that caused the collapse of 4 building contractors of their business that were involved. But Serco still profited from the arrangement, and that transfer of risk can often be used to manipulate arguments for it to occur, because the risk of private investment is different to public investment in PPPs, which changes the way costs are calculated, and that risk is often unknown to the public due to the commercially sensitive nature of these partnerships requiring confidentiality. There are places where private-public partnerships work, and there are some that they really don't. Low-wage economies, for example, tend to have trouble finding ways to make PPPs profitable, and they tend to have heavier impacts on low-income earners. There are a huge number of risks involved, and on the whole, research tends to see them as a bit of a smokescreen to hide costs, not save costs. But in a country where the government seems disinclined to listen to research, borrows $12 billion for things that aren't tax cuts while offering $14 billion in tax cuts, a smokescreen to hide costs and ill-thought-out plans certainly seem like something they'd probably be keen for. Hello there, kia ora. We've been trying to work out what to do for today's video, but, well, there's a bit of a problem. See, Parliament's not sitting at the moment, they're in recess, which means we don't get to hear big stories about big policy changes that are coming in. And there's lots of little stories I could do stuff about, like how News Talk wants us to stop being so mean to the Prime Minister just because he's wealthy, when the reality is that wealth isn't actually the issue. It's the fact that when he sits there and talks about the struggle of low-income earners, a struggle he's made worse through policies that saw the lowest increase of minimum wage, increases of prices of things like public transport or car registration, fuel, food, power, rent. those things that really hurt people on low incomes, it does feel kind of disingenuous coming from the Prime Minister, especially when you know that this month he sold an apartment that he earned an extra $70,000 on in capital gains, which went completely untaxed because the Bright Line test got moved from 10 years back to 2 years, and he'd had the apartment for 4, so now he falls outside that period, doesn't have to pay that extra 70 grand. See how it makes him seem so relatable to low-income earners. I could talk about the mood of the boardroom report that the Herald released today, but I really don't want to. I mean, it's just another version of their business confidence survey. It gives CEO vibes priority over everyone else in their lived experiences and telling the world that that's news or that it actually matters. I could talk about the census data that's just been released. It shows during the tenure of the last government, we got to an all-time high in home ownership around the country. Although more recently, the amount of mortgage applications going out for investment properties has surpassed first home buyer applications for the first time in 2.5 years. The census data also showed that we'd become more diverse, and the rainbow community now makes up nearly 5% of the population, which I'm sure will make a certain self-appointed bishop explode in righteous anger. But well, that pretty much sums up all the really interesting things that were in the census data. I could talk about how acne rates are going up everywhere in the world, except here, but nobody really knows why. It could be ease of access to acne medication. It could be the fact that there's large areas of green space that we spend a lot of time in outside. It could be a side effect of healthy home improvements that were pushed through under Labour, or it could be down to the increasing cost of medical care, which mean less people are seeing doctors about it. I could talk about the so-called budget blowout of Te Whatu Ora, but I've talked about that before many times and mentioned the fact that the budget actually had a lower than inflation increase in funding for them. So this isn't a blowout. This is underfunding in action. I could talk about government member credit card purchases, but it's actually really dull. There was a harmonica and McDonald's. So instead, I'm just going to go for some blatant self-promotion. Look, Friday night, there's our regular weekly live show, Behind the Walls. We have this week Dunedin Mayor Jules Radich and Labour's Dr. Tracy McClellan live in the studio, well, virtual studio, talking about the Dunedin Hospital. There might be a third person, still working on that one, but we'll see. And we've also got a pre-recorded interview with Te Tai Tonga MP Takuta Ferris, where I get to ask him questions like this. The Treaty Principles Bill, how fucked up is that going to make things?
It won't go anywhere, bro.
If you don't feel like watching videos, you could always read the newsletter that I do each week. This one I actually did a ton of research on, answering the question that was posed by Lynn Tower, of all people, about how much we actually see David Seymour and, the other party leaders. I used some AI tools for this, as well as some good old-fashioned quantitative research to find out, and yeah, it's a fair bit. So all the stuff, it's linked in my bio. Feel free to go and, click on it, follow it, subscribe it, read it, however it works. Or don't. Not the police. Last week, 35,000 people took to the streets of Dunedin to protest the recent announcement of downgraded plans for the Dunedin Hospital. The announcement was made by Minister for Delivering Bad News, Chris Bishop, seen here recreating his favourite scene from Lord of the Rings, where Saruman uses the Palantir to talk to Sauron. Joined Health Minister Dr. Shane Reti to deliver the news. The reason given was a potential cost blowout of up to $3 billion, which was only acceptable for tax cuts, apparently. On Sunday afternoon, or Sunday morning actually, about 2 o'clock, an altercation in Wellington's Dixon Street after the last All Blacks versus Wallabies game has resulted in a diplomatic scuffle as police have requested diplomatic immunity be removed from the partner of an Australian diplomat. Part of the hold-up is because Australian understanding of diplomatic immunity laws were based on feedback from Mel Gibson after he filmed Lethal Weapon 2. Sovereign citizen Richard Civil, seen here about to tip his fedora and screech "Milady" to some poor woman he's seen on the street, was this week convicted for threats he made against the lives of public figures before he went on the run from police. During the trial, he tried and failed to use what the judge called pseudo-law gobbledygook. Interesting bonus fact for you all, no sovereign citizen argument has ever, in any court in the world, been successful because it's made up bullshit. Police revealed he'd been caught in Te Puke, after a 3-hour standoff, and police were led to him because of comments he made on a social media channel linked to alt-right counterspin media that a public informant had told them about, highlighting that police are not monitoring these channels. Upon conviction, Civil seemed shocked that his made-up mumbo-jumbo hadn't worked and his constant spouting of conspiracy theories was so prolific it led to his capture. So much so that his only comment after conviction was, "I am speechless," which would have avoided this whole problem if he'd just started off and stayed that way. Minister for Tobacco, Casey Costello, seen here watching a smoker quit smoking, has this week fronted media for the first and, if she has her way, final time since controversial law changes that match tobacco company talking points mysteriously ended up in her hands after law changes around heated tobacco products kicked in this week. The independent evidence that she promised media to justify tax rebates to Philip Morris were in fact out of date and funded by tobacco lobbyists, which should come as no surprise since her work at Hobson's Pledge also entailed dealing with things well past their use-by date that are full of poison and spread toxicity. Te Whatu Ora was reported to be on track for a near $1 billion deficit after financial reports. Health New Zealander Commissioner Lester Levy, seen here announcing that the new policy that laughter is the best medicine because it's free so he won't have to pay for it, forgot to bring to select committee hearings last month. They were finally made public. The report mentions a number of one-off costs and events like back pay, holiday pay, and leave pay being paid out, which are legal requirements and shouldn't be cast as an issue that's causing problems with the health sector that lead to the deficit. But never once actually mentions the fact that Te Whatu Ora is a business, so the idea of turning a profit is not how they should be looking at it. An operational deficit is actually technically a shortfall in funding. But who needs fully funded working healthcare systems when you've got vibes? Government modelling released to RNZ under the Official Information Act shows new oil and gas exploration plans are not likely to see any results for at least a decade. According to the official advice, that means that the short-term impacts on energy supply, which the government lied about to try and justify the decision, and emissions that the government tried to downplay caused by the process will actually be much smaller than expected. But much like the public submission process itself, which only had 4 days that people could get their feedback in, said Shane Jones, Minister of Stripping Resources at Any Cost, seen here knowing that he who smelt it dealt it, rubble, rubble, rubble. Don't give a shit what you have to say. Simeon Brown, seen here realizing what Shane Jones was talking about when he said he who smelt it dealt it, this week announced the reversal of blanket speed reductions around schools, put in place under what he claims was the previous Labour government. These reductions were actually put in place by local authorities based on public feedback and screeds of international research on the topic. During the announcement, Brown said, "Sure, some of your kids may die, but that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make." Next party leader David Seymour, seen here cosplaying as Paul Rubens as Pee Wee Herman in more than a single photo can actually really portray, had past claims that he never received an official invite to the final public engagement of Kingitu Heitia before his death, the Koronehana. They've been shown to be false, with official emails between the Prime Minister's office and Seymour being released. Seymour's office said, well, it contained Māori words, so naturally we ignored it. Finance Minister Nicola Willis, seen here trying an old Jedi mind trick to make everyone ignore the economy she tanked, promoted the start of new ECE funding model Family Boost as it came into effect this week. Under the new system, parents must pay for childcare costs up front and every quarter fill out paperwork to reclaim their expenses in what the government is calling a streamlined process that will somehow see families better off. When asked to explain how it works, Nicola Willis pulled out a piece of string and a pack of pins. Today is the final day Destiny Church leader Brian Tamaki, seen here greeting his supporters in the traditional manner they're accustomed to, as well as co-defendants, could file their responses to the High Court in the defamation case being brought against them by Rainbow Storytime. It comes after Tamaki raged at the census data, which showed that the population of the rainbow community made up almost 5% of the total population in the country, and one of his staunchest defenders on the North Shore was marched out of Birkenhead Library by police and trespassed for illegally filming and threatening behaviour, which included destroying a display that included a rainbow. In which it comes as no surprise because for some of you who've been around for a while, you might remember the story from last year where I was chased down and yelled at by a Destiny Church member on the North Shore. Same guy. Anyway, Tamaki, the self-proclaimed free speech advocate, has also threatened to unleash his totally not a gang man up on pro-Palestinian protesters this weekend if the Prime Minister didn't step in and stop them. And finally, Aotearoa New Zealand has reclaimed the world record for the largest haka ever performed. The previous record, held by the French, was smashed as 10,000 people at Eden Park performed the most well-known haka, ka mate. Participants included US talk show host Conan O'Brien and filmmaker Taika Waititi. In the crowd, National Party MP Paul Goldsmith watched, saying afterwards, "That was nice. Not let's celebrate our unique culture and Indigenous place in the world stage and find ways to ensure equitable outcomes that protect both the culture and those people. Nice, but, still interesting to watch." Anyway, that's it for the news this week. Done and dusted.
Hey guys, Blake here. Right now, over on the community tab here on YouTube, we have a poll going on the future of Behind the Walls. So we would love your guys' input on how you would like to see the show going forward. What day you would like it, if you would like it split into 2 parts, or however you might like it. If there's another option that I haven't thought of that you would like to put in the comments, you can do that as well. We look forward to hearing your responses, and we will be sharing the results in the near future across all of our platforms. Have a great Sunday, and we'll see you next week.
Here. The links to other things that come at the end of YouTube videos.